You spend hours mapping the market. You identify the macro trend, you pinpoint the exact mathematical boundaries of a structural support zone, and you read the institutional volume. You sit at your screens, the price drops straight into your perfect setup, and instead of clicking the mouse, you freeze. When the market inevitably launches exactly as predicted without them, amateurs blame their trading psychology. They assume the solution is reading another book on trading mindset or trying to force themselves to be braver. Standard mindset training treats hesitation as a character flaw or a lack of discipline. Hesitation persists as long as the point of entry remains a subjective decision. Without a strictly binary requirement for entry, the brain defaults to doubt. To eliminate fear from the keyboard, execution must transform from an emotional choice into a completely rigid mathematical checklist. If the checklist is incomplete, your fingers stay off the mouse. The mistake retail traders make when they gain access to proprietary indicators is treating directional arrows as a standalone strategy. They slap an indicator on a naked chart and try to click every single fuchsia or cyan arrow that prints. That is signal-chasing behavior, and the market will quickly liquidate that account. In a professional system, an indicator is never the primary hypothesis. It is strictly a chronological validator, the final mechanical latch in a multivariable sequence. We are going to construct what we call the Nuclear Junction. It is a 4-part operational architecture designed to systematically remove human emotion from the trading sequence. The first layer establishes the path of least resistance. We track a short-term and long-term moving average curve sloping cleanly upward. Executing against macro gravity is a mathematical disadvantage. This slope verifies the macro tide, dictating a strict long bias strategy. The second step is mapping the exact physical limits of the potential setup. The chart now displays a fixed structural support zone. We call this the 40% concrete wall. Directly beneath it is a rigid boundary line representing the maximum risk limit. You now know your exact downside exposure to the penny before considering an entry. By defining macro alignment and these micro risk limits mathematically, you prevent yourself from taking blind, unstructured positions in the middle of open air. The third layer of the protocol requires verifying the fuel gauge of the market. We have to confirm that opposing liquidity is completely exhausted. These 3 volume histograms track that exhaustion. During a structural pullback, we look for a deep liquidity sweep. Notice how the middle histogram spikes heavily as weak hands are flushed out, followed immediately by the third histogram dropping sharply. That specific volume divergence confirms an algorithmic hunt for liquidity. It proves mathematically that the sell-side pressure is dead. The environment is now perfectly primed for action. The gravity is aligned, the boundaries are locked, and the fuel is verified. Yet, even with this flawless setup, human discretion cannot be trusted to pull the trigger. This requires the fourth and final layer, the ABC wave logic trigger. It serves as the ultimate algorithmic authorization. Watch closely as the price hits our established support zone. The algorithm runs a continuous microstructure calculation under the hood. It tracks the initial drive, maps the structural sweep, and waits for the exact micropivot to complete before printing a sharp directional arrow directly on the tape. That specific mathematical coordinate proves the trend buyers have successfully recaptured the intraday microtrend. The final validation is complete, and the trigger activates. The operational rule for this exact millisecond is absolute. Your cognitive input must drop to 0. You do not wait to see if the next 5-minute candle looks safer. The machine has handed you the trigger, and the click must be automatic. Constraining a complex market environment into this final 4-part binary output yields a rigid machine response at the moment of execution. There is one final critical element to operating a mechanical system, and it is the single hardest rule for a human being to follow: the exit protocol when a validated setup fails. Amateur traders treat a stop loss as an arbitrary pain threshold. When a trade moves against them, they widen their risk parameters and wait for the market to return to break even. This chart illustrates what happens when an unexpected macroeconomic event hits the tape. Even with a perfectly triggered long position, heavy downward price movement drives straight through the concrete support zone and definitively crosses the pre-calculated risk boundary. We call this unconditional structural invalidation. If the price closes cleanly beneath that calculated boundary, the institutional structure has flipped. The mathematical hypothesis of your trade is proven definitively false, requiring an instant exit. Taking that quick, engineered paper cut without an ounce of emotional hesitation is the mark of a professional hunter. It protects the operational capital, keeping the machine alive for the next cycle. Transitioning from chaotic, discretionary trading into a unified mechanical sequence requires a complete reassessment of how a trader interacts with the screen. This diagram represents the cohesive architecture of the nuclear junction. The macro moving averages form the heavy base. The precise risk boundaries build the walls. The volume histograms fill the core. And finally, the directional arrow snaps onto the peak as your exact execution trigger. Extracting any isolated indicator from this pyramid and trying to use it in a vacuum is guaranteed to fail. The structure only works when all layers validate each other. Consistency is the product of an architecture that eliminates the requirement for human intuition at the point of entry.